It was the most humiliating radio transmission in the annals of World War II, a desperate plea that exposed the cracks in Allied might. In the sweltering jungles of New Guinea in July 1942, a battle-hardened American colonel watched with barely concealed disdain as a ragtag group of Australian militia hacked away at their rifles in a muddy clearing. These weren't elite troops, they looked like farmers fresh from the outback, sawing off barrels and jury-rigging grips from scrap wood and vines. To the Americans, bred on industrial firepower and precision engineering, it screamed amateur hour. The colonel smirked to his aides. Those blokes won't survive a single Jap patrol. He couldn't have been more mistaken. Because mere hours later, that same colonel found himself trapped in a savage ambush, his men cut down by invisible enemies in the choking undergrowth, radioing for salvation from the very amateurs he'd mocked. What unfolded next didn't just pull him from the brink, it shattered U.S. military arrogance and quietly reshaped how the Allies waged war in the Pacific. To grasp the full weight of it, we need to rewind to that steamy airstrip where the sawing started, and uncover the secrets that turned underdogs into ghosts of the jungle. The American officer had choppered in from Port Moresby, stepping off into a wall of humidity that carried a stench like nothing in his Pacific campaigns. It was raw, primal, hints of rot, sweat-soaked earth, and something indefinably human, like bodies left too long in the rain. He'd seen the aftermath of Tarawa beaches and Guadalcanal foxholes, but this odor clawed at his senses, screaming neglect or worse. Spotting a cluster of Australian soldiers gearing up nearby, he figured it for a breakdown in supply lines or morale. No self-respecting army would let its men ferment like that on purpose. He strode over to a lanky Aussie sergeant, offering crates of soap, razors, and bug spray from his own stocks. The response was a dry chuckle edged with steel. "Mate, that's not a bug, it's our bloody edge." This wasn't sloppiness, it was strategy, the kind that kept Aussies breathing while others ended up in shallow graves. The Yank pressed for details, and what he got was a crash course that appended everything he'd learned at West Point about modern warfare. But the smell was just the opener. The rifles rattled him next, and the boots, or lack thereof, left him speechless. Back home, the stats were whispering truths the brass ignored. In the brutal Kokoda track campaign, Australian units racked up kill ratios of 1 friendly loss for every 300 Japanese taken out. U.S. forces in nearby theaters? A dismal 1 to 8. It wasn't luck or terrain, it was a system that worked while others bled out. The Aussies started with scent, ditching every trace of civilization 2 weeks before a push. No Yank-issued soap, no aftershave, no canned rations that screamed, foreigner. They chewed on local roots, smeared mud like camouflage for the nose, and even rolled in decaying leaves to blend with the forest's decay. The result. Japanese scouts, noses tuned to the jungle like hounds, walked right past hidden positions, sniffing nothing but home turf. One report from 42 detailed a nip patrol stepping over an Aussie's outstretched leg, mistaking it for a fallen branch in the gloom. Weapons came under the blade too. The standard Owen gun or Lee Enfield, solid pieces, accurate at range, got shortened, silenced, and stripped down. Why butcher a fine rifle? Because in that green hell, fights erupted at spitting distance, not across open fields. Long barrels snagged on creepers, clanged like bells, shortened ones slithered through silent as serpents. And those rounds. They didn't tickle, they pulverized, punching through bamboo barricades where lighter Yank ammo bounced off. Experts back in Brisbane called it madness, but in the mud, it meant the difference between a clean kill and a drawn-out brawl. Footwear flipped the script even harder. Many Aussies traded boots for crude sandals carved from rubber scraps, echoes of what the locals wore, leaving prints that blended with native trails. Japanese trackers, masters at reading the earth, saw only friendly villagers or their own men passing through. No alarms raised, no traps sprung. Aussies wove through streams, balanced on roots, erased their backtrail with fern fronds. The enemy, who'd stalked Dutch and British forces like prey, suddenly hunted shadows that vanished. Attitude sealed it. While Yanks dubbed the Japanese Tojo's monkeys, or worse, dripping with contempt for their primitive foes, Aussies spoke of the Emperor's finest with a nod of respect. They pored over captured maps, studied Bushido tactics, learned from every skirmish without ego. No underestimating the enemy who bled the same red. Interrogations. Gentle probes over shared tea, building trust for real intel, not screams for lies. Speed, or the lack of it, drove the Yanks nuts. U.S. doctrine preached blitz, charge hard, overwhelm with steel. Aussies crept at a snail's pace, 50 meters an hour, freezing like statues every step to listen, smell, sense. In demos, for men melted into the bush unheard, turning hunters into the hunted. This wasn't war as Patton knew it. It was patience weaponized, roots tracing back to Aboriginal lore. 40,000 years of becoming one with the land, reading whispers in the wind. The Yank observer scribbled notes for days, urging adoption. His report shelved. But the jungle had its own plans. 6 days on, in the heart of Kokoda, U.S. bravado would crumble in a hail of lead, forcing a reckoning no file could bury. The jungle didn't wait for reports or approvals. 6 days after the American colonel dismissed the Australians as bush amateurs, his battalion walked straight into the teeth of a Japanese trap in the Owen Stanley range. Intelligence had promised a quiet flank route through the Kokoda track. What they got was hell. At 10:14 a.m. on July 21, 1942, the first mortar rounds screamed down through the canopy. Then came the machine guns, Nambu 99s and Type 92s, chattering from perfectly camouflaged positions dug into the ridge above. The Japanese had been watching the Americans for 2 days, listening to every snapped twig, every whispered order, every metallic clink of canteens. They knew exactly where the landing zone would be, exactly which trail the column would take, exactly how long it would take for air support to arrive. In the first 90 seconds, 47 Americans fell. The colonel, positioned near the center, survived the initial storm only because a fallen log took most of the shrapnel meant for him. He did what doctrine demanded: return fire, call in artillery from the rear batteries, request P-40 strafing runs, form a defensive perimeter. Everything textbook. Everything predictable. Artillery began crashing down within 12 minutes. Accurate, devastating, cratering the jungle in huge smoking scars. Warhawks roared overhead 15 minutes later, guns blazing. But the Japanese were ghosts. They had spent weeks carving fighting holes deep into the earth, reinforced with logs and camouflaged with living ferns. When shells fell, they simply curled tighter in their bunkers. When planes strafed, they vanished under the triple canopy roof and shifted through hidden crawl trenches. The Americans were shooting at muzzle flashes and shadows, burning through belts of .30 cal, while the enemy picked them off one by one with disciplined, aimed fire. By 11:40, the battalion was bleeding out. Ammo was running dangerously low. Casualties topped 60. The colonel's voice on the radio had gone from calm command to raw desperation. Then he remembered the Australian patrol, operating independently a few kilometers north. 4 men under a grizzled sergeant who had already spent 10 days in the green hell, moving at their glacial pace, gathering scraps of enemy movement. He swallowed his pride and keyed the mic. "This is Yankee 6. We are pinned, heavy contact, taking heavy casualties. Request immediate assistance from your patrol. Over." The Australian sergeant listened to the frantic American traffic crackling over the net. He could hear the gunfire echoing through the valley. He could do the math. At the current rate of loss, the Yanks had maybe 40 minutes before they were overrun. Standard orders were clear. Long-range recce patrols avoided decisive engagements. 4 men against a reinforced Japanese company was suicide. He made the call in under 30 seconds. They would help. But they would do it their way. When the colonel learned the Aussies were coming, at roughly 80 meters per hour, his reaction was explosive. 80 meters an hour? My men are dying right now. Get here faster. The sergeant's reply was calm, almost gentle. If we move faster, we get heard. If we get heard, we die too, and then nobody helps you. Hold the line, mate. We'll be there when we can actually do something. The next 117 minutes felt like eternity to the Americans. What they couldn't see was the Australians already slipping through the Japanese rear. Using the roar of the firefight as perfect sound cover, the 4 men ghosted forward. They passed within arm's reach of enemy sentries focused entirely on the slaughter to their front. They crawled through bamboo thickets without so much as a rustle. At one point, a Japanese lieutenant stepped over the point man's prone body, mistaking the mud-smeared figure for a fallen log, and kept walking. By 1351, the Australian patrol was inside the Japanese perimeter, 40 meters from the enemy battalion command post, surrounded by over 150 men who had no idea death had walked right through their lines. The sergeant began calling corrections. Not the broad area barrages that had been pounding empty jungle for hours. These were surgical, exact grid references, adjustments in meters. He could see the Japanese major directing the battle from a camouflaged CP. He could see the heavy machine gun nests chewing up the American perimeter. He could see the ammo resupply points, the reserve platoon staging area, the withdrawal trails. The first corrected salvo landed square on the command post. The major and his staff vanished in a fountain of earth and flame. Command disintegrated instantly. The second salvo silenced the twin Nambus that had accounted for nearly half the American dead. The third cut off the main escape route, trapping the Japanese in their own killing ground. The fourth hit an ammunition cache. Secondary explosions rolled through the ridge for 10 full minutes. In 19 minutes the battle flipped. The force that had been methodically dismantling an American battalion was suddenly shredded from within. Positions that had been invisible became targets. Escape routes became death traps. The surviving Japanese broke, abandoning weapons, wounded, and cohesion, fleeing into the bush. Final tally: 68 Americans killed or wounded out of 142 engaged. Japanese losses estimated at over 110 confirmed dead, unknown additional wounded and missing. The 4 Australians who had infiltrated the enemy lines and directed the fire suffered not a scratch. After-action reports were stamped top secret and buried, not for security, but for institutional survival. For men with hacked-up rifles, rubber sandals, and the patience of predators had done what 142 elite American infantrymen backed by massive fire support could not. Captured Japanese documents later confirmed what the Aussies had already proven in blood. Orders to frontline units were explicit: against American forces, strike hard and fast, inflict maximum casualties in the opening minutes, then melt away before air and artillery could respond. Against Australian patrols, the standing order was stark: avoid contact. Do not engage unless forced. Do not pursue. If unavoidable, break off immediately and withdraw to sectors where the bush ghosts were not operating.